Hello, and welcome to, well, a bit of a strange introduction, because this introduction is not going to go live till after the actual video has gone up. And there is a reason for that. Honestly, PQ17 is not an easy topic to talk about, and it is a topic of high emotion. And it's one of those scenarios where there is a lot of people who focus in on one or two things. And they look at the convoy often in isolation, as if it's the only thing going on in the world, as if Pound doesn't have to think about the king visiting Scarpa Flow around the same times and securing him. I'm not talking about Admiral King, I'm talking about a king which actually Pound cared about. There is, of course, Pound's illness, but I think that's harped on about a bit too much. More important than all of this is the overarching scenario of it's still quite new. The American and British working together is still new. There is a war going on in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. There are all sorts of events going on all around the world. So PQ17 has to be examined in all of that. And this, as I said, this video will go live after the live is over. That's, of course, if I can get the PowerPoint slides to work. So the background. And this is another point where I get myself into trouble, because PQ17 and PQ18, which comes after it, and all the PQs basically, happen because of a lot of shouting and screaming by Stalin for needing support. But whilst I don't agree with the concept of the Russian people being at fault for Second World War, I do feel that Stalin did sort of bring it on himself. And I will explain his why with the help of this timeline. So I'm going to disappear for a second, and I'm going to put some text up on the screen. Now, September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland, initiating World War II in Europe. September 3rd, 1939, honouring their guarantee of Poland's borders, Great Britain and France declare war on Germany. This is boilerplate timeline. So it honestly, when I was sort of writing this and looking at the various sources, I was going, wow, this has been rewritten so many freaking times. We're all sounding the same. September 17th, 1939, the Soviet Union invades Poland from the east. Now, first of all, they've checked to see what Britain and France do, because if Stalin sees them immediately crush Germany, he doesn't want to get involved in Poland. Which he doesn't expect to happen, but, you know. He also wants to finish off his war with the Japanese. All sensible things to do. In the 30th of November, between November the 30th, 1939, and March 12th, 1940, the Soviet Union invades Finland, initiating the so-called Winter War. Eventually, the Finns sue for peace, and they have sort of to agree to certain things. They don't really want to, but they have to agree to it. June 28th, 1940, the Soviet Union forces Romania to cede the eastern province of Bessarabia and northern half of Bukovina to the Soviet Ukraine. June the 14th, 1940, to August the 6th, 1940, the Soviet Union occupies the Baltic states on the 14th to 18th of June, and then engineers communist coup d'etats in each of them. And then November 1940, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania join the Axis. March the 1st, Bulgaria joins the Axis. And Nazi Germany and its Axis partners, apart from Bulgaria, invade the Soviet Union. They're joined shortly by Finland. So here's the thing. I always think Stalin's lucky to get any support from the British at all. if it wasn't for the British having a very pragmatic approach to war and the fact that their enemy and my enemy's enemy is my friend approach to politics, they could well have found themselves without anything. Britain did have an empire and a network of alliances across the world. Yes, it was hard stretched, but honestly, Russia doesn't give it much other than another front to fight to annoy the Germans, and it doesn't need to ally with them for this because the Germans have invaded Russia. And to an extent, Stalin has brought this on himself. He has both allied with another dictator who was even less reliable than he was, not quite as successful at murdering his own people, but we'll leave that to one side. He's also aggressively beaten up and attacked quite most of his neighbors, which doesn't really put him in the good guy camp. And frankly, most of the powers who Hitler managed to organize to go to war against Stalin are not, whilst they might well be fascist regimes, are in many ways fascist regimes because their massive communist neighbor keeps trying to take their land. I don't like fascism, I don't like communism, and in this case, I don't like either of these dictators. But here's the thing. Stalin has managed to bring this on himself, and you have convoys coming back and forth. The trouble is, the most difficult time of year for the convoys to go is summer. Okay? We all know we call certain parts of this world, this lovely planet we inhabit, this third rock out from the sun, we call it the land of the midnight sun, because when it tilts far enough on its axis, they get permanent sunshine. Tilts far enough on its axis, it's the other side, when its axis goes sort of round on the other side of its orbit, and the axis it's out there, it's completely dark. So winter time, it's completely dark. Now, if you think about that, that means for half the year, with it getting rapidly dark, being few hours of daylight, it's absolutely excellent for avoiding air patrols, because most of the air patrols in World War II are doing visual search. Yes, the British develop air surface radar quite quickly, but others take a while to get there. They do get there, but they don't get there that quickly. And the German, as we've discussed already, the German convoy attack plan for the Battle of the Atlantic and the Arctic convoys was very much dependent upon reconnaissance by aircraft. So, daytime, summer, is not good for sending convoys. There is no darkness for them to hide in. That means ships which use visual means to fire at their targets can hunt them all 24 hours a day, which describes most of the German warships. Aircraft can hunt them most of the day. Oh yeah, and the sun months are also the months where the weather is usually the most stable, so again, submarines can hunt more of the time. I'm not saying it's nice weather, I'm just saying it's more stable. Winter months, it goes from being, well, let's put it this way, summer months, it's, I wouldn't say predictable, but within a margin of error, it's workable. Winter months, it's cold, it's wet, and it's not a cold wet. It's ice cold wet. It's just not good, okay? But conversely, that means winter is far better for sending convoys than summer. So here is the various orders of battle you get for PQ17, and I was tempted to put in the German Axis Forces one, but honestly, that makes even less sense to include than this one. because I get this one quoted at me a lot by people going, oh, they have all these destroyers, all these cruisers, all these ships. Why are they worried about turpits? Why are they worried about this? Okay, right. Let me start from the top. So, I'm going to expand this out. And again, disappear. And I'm going to explain stuff from behind it. So, there is a fourth trawler called Lord Middleton, which is also part of the PQ17 Order of Battle, but there is a dispute over where exactly she is at the time by this point, because she could well have been attached to the auxiliaries, who do quite well in wandering around. And the auxiliaries are critical for getting the ships there, and especially the escorts, along with the merchant vessels. Notice what isn't included in any of this. There is no escort carrier. There is an aircraft carrier, HMS Victorious. She's hanging out with two battleships, Duke of York and Washington. Some rather large cruise. There are some cruisers with her and the battleships, and there are some cruisers in another cruiser force, and there are destroyers with both the cruiser force and the battle force, and there's even a submarine in front of the convoy. But the convoy group, as far as you can understand it, are those ships which are not bolded. Now, I had a choice here. I could bold all the ones which were with the squadron, which were with the convoy, or I could bold all the ones which weren't. I chose to bold all the ones which weren't because I tried to make this as straightforward as it possibly is. The big bold group that we start talking about are all parts of forces which are not with the convoy directly. They might be with the covering cruiser force, which is closer, the first squadron cruiser squadron, or they might well be with the battleship, aircraft carrier, battleships and aircraft carrier sitting off further away. But what there are 39 merchant ships, including 3 rescue ships, Raflin, Zafaran, and Zamlek. Before anyone points out, yes, HMS Ashanti was there. Of course, if she'd been with the convoy escort, I could make a joke here, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to make my usual joke about a tribal being with an escort, because PQ17 is too serious for that. PQ17 is just before all the escort carriers enter services, before a lot of the things which would become standard from late 1942 onwards came into service. You have 4 corvettes there, one of whom, as we've been over, HMS Lotus, is brand spanking new. The rest are not exactly old. The trawlers, anti-aircraft ships are mostly converted merchant vessels. This is not what you would call a fighting force. Their destroyers are Fury, Ledbury, Wilton, Offa, Leamington. Okay? There are some USS destroyers, American destroyers, with the cruiser force. This is an order of battle which is designed to deal with all the threats that it's likely to face. Okay? You have your battle force positioned to deal with the likely position and likely attack of the enemy battle force, but they are positioned back out of aircraft range, out of land attack range, out of where the submarines will be hunting, because, believe it or not, the British have learned their lessons. They don't want fleet carriers going out hunting submarines. They're too precious. They're too darn useful. And that is, yes, HMS Victorious, otherwise known as USS Robin, and various other things. They have 2 battleships there. Washington, we can talk about many things, but Duke of York. The victor of the Battle of North Cape. The one which will sink Scharnhorst. Yeah. She's got a chance. And 2 battleships. All those cruisers, all those destroyers. If the battle force managed to be in the right position, so it got between the convoys, and there are multiple convoys moving around. There's not just PQ17. There are multiple convoys. There are convoys crossing the Atlantic. There are convoys crossing the Arctic in both directions. There's QP13 and there's as well as PQ17. There are all these ships going around. There are all these commitments going around. That is what Pound has to worry about. And before you think that battleship force and aircraft carrier are there just to cover PQ17, no. Their job is to act as the response force should a surface ship come out. Should a surface. And they don't know. That surface ship might go to the Arctic convoys. It might break to the Atlantic convoys, especially if it's operating from Norway. And either direction, they have got to cover both. So they are positioned to cover both, which means in reality, they're not in a great position to cover either unless you've got intelligence and intelligence in enough time so you can put the stuff in the right position, which is why you have the cruiser force. But the cruiser force is nothing massive either. It's 2 American cruisers, 2 British cruisers. It's Cumberland, London, Tuscaloosa, and Wichita, from memory. Tuscaloosa. Sorry. And they're a good force. They're all 8-inch cruisers. If they catch the enemy, goodness Lord help him. But again, they're not. They could still be overwhelmed by a strong task group. And as we see, some of the orders, depending on how you read them, are more about reinforcing the cruiser group to deal with a potential surface radar than they are about abandoning the convoy. But that's the force. That is what we got. And you've got 3 minesweeping sloops. Halcyon class, Salamander, Britomart, and Halcyon herself. So as we keep on going on, sailing context. They were the 19th outbound Arctic convoy. So by this time, the Allies have kind of got into a well-worn pattern. And I'm not going to say it, but in a way, the Germans have picked up on this. The Germans have picked up on this well-worn pattern. But the trouble is it's summer. And summer is not a time in the Arctic you want to be in a pattern if you're fighting a war, especially not an enemy who's relying on visual before you've got escort carriers. See, the thing is, if you have an escort carrier, as PQ18, which runs in September, does, what they do is they just keep shooting down the scout aircraft. And that makes a big difference. That, and it's a massive escort for PQ18. Pound is often criticized for how long it takes to organize the next follow-up convoy, but honestly, his policy seems to be, I'm going to send the biggest possible escort I can have so that I do not have another nightmare scenario. And you can understand his thinking. Also, again, around PQ17, there were 2 dummy convoys run, which the Germans don't seem to have noticed either of them, so they weren't really that helpful. But they were run. The British did run dummy convoys to try and distract them, using minesweepers and merchant ships. There was a returning convoy, QP13, which the Germans took no notice of as well, because the Germans have a... As I've said as well, the Germans do realize the limitations of this kind of warfare, in that you don't know what you're sinking. You don't know what cargo they're carrying or how useful it is. But they seem to develop the policy of going after the cargo of the ships going to Russia rather than wasting their ammunition on the ships coming back, is what they felt, which I think is rather short-sighted. It's valuing the cargo more than the ships. And in a way, it allows the convoys coming back to relax. Not by much, because there's always the chance that you do get that lone assassin who wants to buck the trend, or he's rather thinking, actually, just taking out these ships helps, because if I take them out, then they can't be used for other things. But, you know. Also, considering the fate of HMS Edinburgh, they were attacking ships going back if they thought they were good enough targets. So the idea that they weren't, no. But PQ13, QP13, they seem to take no real notice of, because they're concentrating on PQ17. Both sides suffer communication issues, and both sides have issues with their higher command. Hitler orders, and then countermands and orders and countermands. Tirpitz's group going to sea again and moving. And the intelligence being gathered is picking up on the orders, going for... And it's Pound trying to interpret those orders almost in real time and trying to work out what's going on. In many ways, Pound was lacking a senior officer to consult with at this point. And I have a reason for saying this. He doesn't have a trusted senior officer in the Admiralties, in the sort of the Sea Lords, who can argue back with him. I have talked about Chatfield making decisions pre-war, and I am not the biggest fan of Chatfield because he writes Henderson out of history. But I know from reading the Admiralty documents that in many ways Chatfield made Henderson better by arguing the other side, and Henderson made Chatfield better by arguing the other side. You had the two personalities to argue with each other. You had someone who would go, "But why, sir?" And because they're another Sea Lord, because they're another senior person, they have that ability to. Why doesn't Fraser have that ability at this point? Fraser's not that kind of character. He is very much focusing on his own mission and it's a big mission, as taking over the role of Third Sea Lord. And the other successors also. There's just no one really who is not going to take a step back from their own mission, because they're all concentrating on the mission so much because they need to, because it's wartime, to be able to argue the higher toss with the First Sea Lord enough for the First Sea Lord to have someone to think about it. There are people whose roles it is to do. But Pound can come across quite strong-minded when he wants to, and the thing is, you need to be quite strong-minded to argue back with it. And you need to be prepared for potential fallout. Pound has the weight of the world on his shoulders. We talk about Jellicoe being the only man who could lose the war in the First World War in 30 minutes. Pound was making decisions every single day like PQ17. Every single day there are convoys going all around the world and all sorts of potential threats being picked up by Ultra. Every single day he's making decisions, and he's living with that, the reality of making those decisions. He gets some wrong. He gets a lot right. The trouble is, this one is rather big on the one in the wrong character, wrong folder. Well, it looks like it's one rather big one in the wrong folder. So here's his decision, and here's the results of it. This was the first Anglo-American operation in European waters. PQ17, there was all these covering forces there. This was major. This was critical. This was the quarterfinals. Sort of. How to put it? Quarterfinals in a first round in a sort of quarterfinals league game where you have to play, where 4 teams will play and the best 2 teams will go through. Group stage quarterfinals. And it's quite an interesting scenario. He receives information that Tirpitz is at sea, or is going to sea. He's not sure which. And to be fair to him, that's the worst case scenario. How do I put this politely? The worst case scenario for Britain had always been with the Arctic convoys that you would, in summer, when there is constant daylight, would face a strong surface group coming out from a position which meant it could go either way. And the Arctic convoys are forward of the battle force, whereas the Atlantic convoys are behind the battle force. Constant in the air cover, and large known submarine force threat. Now, what's the policy you do in such a situation? A convoy has two scenarios. Basically, there are 2 options for a convoy: stay together or scatter. If you stay together, then you have the choice of which way do I go. If you scatter, everyone's going in every direction. Scattering is a major decision. It is not something you take lightly or you do easily. I don't think Pound makes the right decision, but I can see the logic of his making the decision. And that is something which has to be considered. Pound is looking at a scenario that is the nightmare. And we've already been over what happened the last time the Royal Navy thought it was facing its nightmare scenario. Norway, 1940. The Royal Navy thinks it sees a huge enemy German task group heading into the Atlantic. That's his nightmare scenario. So it misses the troop transport and the other ships heading to Norway. It misses it. Even the best navy in the world, best admirals in the world, or British admirals can make mistakes, is what goes around after this and there's aftermath. But honestly, it's not a mistake. Pound has to pick between moving his battle force forward under Tovey to support the Arctic convoy and potentially abandoning the Atlantic convoys, or scattering or diverting the Arctic convoy. Now, you or I might go, it's easy, send it north. It's not so easy. The other advantage is if he scatters it, then the destroyers from the convoy escort can form up with the cruisers and become a far more potent force, and perhaps stop the surface raider being able to get amongst those are now unescorted merchant ships. But it's still not a good decision to make. And you have to look at where those kills take place. They have managed to get all that distance, all the way there, and they haven't really lost any ships. And then the order to scatter is given, and those ships are hoovered up. They're hoovered up. One of the other interesting questions is that before they go in, there's actually a debate as to whether or not to go north around Svalbard, or even go higher up than they actually do go. They make decisions. There are officers at every single level making decisions with this convoy to try and make it as safe as it possibly can be to get it through. One of the interesting things also is that Pound does say with some of these things, unless Tovey countermands it. So he gives Tovey a bit of a chance to go, But Tovey presumes Pound knows Tirpitz is out at sea. Pound presumes, to an extent, I would say, although he would never claim this. And as he dies, we really don't have his much of interpretation, but it doesn't seem to his style to claim it. Pound would say he was giving his commander freedom of maneuver, because Royal Navy officers have a habit of taking their duty or protection to the point at which they will fight for their ship, fight for the merchant ships, even against overwhelming odds. Which is one thing if it's a Royal Navy group, but if it's the Anglo-American, the first joint operation, and all those ships go down fighting gloriously, but go down fighting and lose the convoy, that won't look good. So that is what leads to those different orders. Cruiser force to withdraw westward at high speed. It's 25 minutes. An operation that lasts weeks. Now, here is the interesting attitude which I have talked of before about Royal Navy reservist officers. I am being ordered to scatter. Fine. If I'm going to scatter, and I can't do anything, the trawlers can't, and actually pretty much all the trawlers do something similar to this. Either form up on the rescue ships or all sorts of things. Ayrshire is the most famous, and Gradwell is the most famous example of this. He is a Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve officer. He doesn't have the maps. He didn't really need the maps because they weren't going up there. And they're going to be with bigger ships, which do have the maps. And he's in a scenario where, well, I'm going to scatter, so trawlers, aren't wanted by the cruisers. They're far too slow. The destroyers can go help the cruisers, but destroyers can't. Corvettes can't either, so they wander off. Again, doing their best to escort something as they go. And this is where I would actually say if my order had been anything, if I'd been in Pound's position, I hope the order I would give, because I can't say, because I'm not in a position, but I hope the order I would have given would have been detach the destroyers to the cruiser force, allow the cruiser force to maneuver, and order the convoy north under the lead of the Commodore and the senior corvette commander, and tell them to go as high north and as arch around as they can. But that's an easy order for me to give, because I know Gradwell does basically that with his trawler. He takes 3 ships, he takes them north, and he slowly migrates them through to the ports. I know he does that, so that's an easy order to give. Pound doesn't know that. Pound is making the decisions from a bunker in London. Granderwall deserves every single medal he gets. He deserves medals for keeping those merchant ships going. He deserves medals for arranging the tanks on them into a firing circle on that deck. He deserves medals for painting all his ships bright white. And most of all, he deserves a medal for literally just going, all right then, I am going to do this the way I want to do this. And still follow my orders, because my orders are to scatter. Nowhere does my order say I can't scatter with other things that are scattering. So what's the aftermath? Well, PQ17, the one which comes after this in September, has an escort carrier. Admiral King using an excuse to withdraw TF-39, and King doesn't like them being under RN command. He doesn't like it, and he uses it. But it's also a case of he wants to commit resources to the Pacific because that's the critical theatre in his mind. In his mind, if you're not running escort convoys immediately, you don't need those ships. He can make better use of them elsewhere. The legacy of PQ17 is often summed up in a very simple narrative. This is a very badly run convoy. And yes, the wrong decision is made. Well, no. Let me rephrase that. Not the wrong decision is made, because the decision did need to do something with the intelligence you had at the time. There's no point reading it backwards and going, we know what Tirpitz was really doing, we know she wasn't really out at sea, we know he didn't ask this question, didn't get this information, all this, da 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 da. But no, with the information Pound had at the time as it was coming in, he has to make a decision. So he's making a decision at the time. The choices, the options of those decisions, we think we can say he selected the wrong option. It was a really bad scenario, and he had a lot of politics to contend with. He took the wrong option. But does that make him a bad admiral? No. Lots of admirals take the wrong option. Doesn't make them bad admirals. That phrase of Arleigh Burke, what's the difference between a good commander and a bad one? 10 seconds. This is 25 minutes. Probably a little bit longer. It is a complicated operation. PQ17 is an operation which has a lot of heroes in it. At every level. But I don't agree with the person who's often portrayed as the villain in a piece. And I don't agree with King being portrayed as a villain in a piece. Actually, I see King's logic as well. No, I'm fighting in the Pacific. I've got all the commitments over there. I need resources. This one isn't going to be used. Okay, take them. I can understand that. There's a logic to that. There's a logic to what Pound has done. And it's a thing you never would want to be in, because think about it, if you're in the scenario, you have to decide between supporting a joint US-British force and moving the heavy group up there to provide them support for this operation, potentially moving those heavy groups, those heavy ships, into submarine-infested waters, and also potentially uncovering your Atlantic convoys, which are your national lifeline, to an enemy surface task force. Or you order the convoy to break up, or you take away its escort. And if you're going to take away its escort, I can understand the logic goes, well, if we're taking away their escort, it's just sending a whole bunch of targets together. So you should scatter them, because that at least gives them a chance, because that means instead of being one solid mass of targets, there's a logic to it. It's not a good logic. It's not a logic any of us would ever hope to be in. It's luckily a decision which only was ever made once in World War II, because afterwards, very shortly afterwards, escort carriers come in and they make a big difference to this. Because escort carriers, with their anti-submarine warfare aircraft, especially Swordfish and Albacores and other things, and their fighters take out the scout aircraft, and their Swordfish, well, they offer a limited anti-ship capability in terms of they might not be able to mount a large enough strike to sink an enemy battleship or an enemy attacking surface raider, but they could probably slow it down. And if they can slow it down, that then gives you more time for your heavy ships to react. And that time is everything. So, where else can you find me? Twitter, AC_Naval History. Patreon, all donations to the book fund, greatly received. And Global Maritime History, where I will be putting some more writing shortly. Anyway, thank you. And as I said, this is going to go up after the live. So I hope you've enjoyed the live, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you. Take care, and thank you for watching. And thank you again to all those people who sent nice messages while we've been dealing with the issues we've had. Hopefully we won't need the police to come out again. Scaffolding gone. Hopefully no burglars anymore. It's really annoying. Really is very annoying. Anyway, take care.